are we seeing? Well, let me start with a story first. There's an illustration, a story about a guy named Rufus and Clarence, and you can tell by their names they're probably from the deep south, right? I'm not going to give you that accent, but these two old geezers had lived across the river from each other in the backwoods for a long time, and they hated each other. Every morning, Rufus would come out of his cabin, yell, go down to the riverside, "Hey, Clarence! If there wasn't a river between you and me, I'd come over there and whoop you." Well, Clarence would come out of his cabin and look across the river and say, "Rufus, if there wasn't a river between us, I'd come over there and whoop you." 20 years this goes on. That's why I say it had to be in Tennessee-ish, down in that area probably where these long feuds go on. Well, one day the Army Corps of Engineers came in and they built a bridge. Well, for another 5 years, they kept going back and forth. Finally, Rufus's wife said, "Listen, I am sick of this. 5 years ago, they built a bridge. If you really are upset with Clarence, just hop yourself across that bridge and go take care of him." Well, Rufus stood there for a few minutes and biting his lip and thinking, "Woman, I'm going to go do it. I'm going to go whoop Clarence." So he goes down to the bridge, can't swim, so he gets about halfway across, looks up, and he turns tail back to his house, climbs under the bed, grabs a shotgun, and he's trembling. And she said, "What is up with you?" He said, "Well, I got halfway across that bridge, and it says, Clarence, 13 feet, 6 inches. And I ran back home because I didn't think he looked that big." Okay, look, it's better than blonde jokes I tell. Question, though, really is, who do you say that I am, right? Well, we have that with each other as well. Those kinds of things. Who do people say that I am? Well, let's start in Mark chapter 8, verse 27. Jesus went out along with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way, he questioned his disciples, saying to them, "Who do people say that I am?" And they told him, saying, "John the Baptist, others say Elijah, but others one of the prophets." And he continued by questioning, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter answered and said to him, "You are the Christ." And he warned them to tell no one about him. Now, before we get into that particularly, let's get some context. Janice and I were able to visit Israel 99, something like that, long time ago, over 20 years ago. And we were able to go up to Caesarea Philippi. Now, if you remember in the biblical story here, they had gone to Tyre and Sidon and come all the way back down to Galilee. Well, this seems to be in that order, but later, and they go back up to Caesarea Philippi, which is north at the base of Mount Hermon, as I remember anyway. Now, this is just context-wise. Jesus has taken them on a retreat, vacation. I don't know what's going on exactly, but he's back in this place, which is really very pagan. On top of the hill was a temple set up just for Caesar. Then you had the Baal temple. Then you had a temple to Pan, the Greek god. As a matter of fact, when Janice and I were there, there's a cave, and they called it the gateway to hell. And the Jordan River actually comes out of that. Now, it looks a little different from the time when Jesus was there because of the earthquake that happened, and I can't remember what year that was, many years ago, but it diverted the channel just a little bit, so it doesn't come out directly out of the cave like it used to, but they said it was an endless cave at that point. But above it, they have these divots just kind of carved into the mountain. It's a huge cliff that goes up, and that's where they would put the little gods for Pan and these others, Aphrodite and all these other things that they would worship. So here, and there's no Jewish temple there. This was a very pagan area, place. Why would you take them there? So Jesus takes them, and by the way, there's huge trout in the Jordan River there. So I'm convinced the river of life in Revelation, there's going to be big trout. Fly fishing is going to be catch and release only, though. But there's going to be fly fishing going on there. That's my guess. I don't know. We'll see. Point is, here Jesus brings them to this place and then challenges them. Now, Remember the first 7 chapters. Up to this point, actually, in chapter 8 as well. People have been healing, they've been fed. He's done all sorts of miraculous things, walking on water, all those things, and he takes them to this place to ask them, who am I? Who do people say that I am? Now, I don't know that I have an answer for that, except for to challenge them. See if they can figure out. Remember, last week was about connecting the dots, right? Well, this is just the second step to that, connecting the dots. Who am I? So Jesus does this, and Peter, recognizing finally who this is, says, oh, you're the Christ, the Son of the Anointed One, as I remember. You are the Christ, Son of the Anointed One, and he warned them not to tell anyone. Now, just as a reminder, Christ in Hebrew is Messiah, and in Greek, it means the Anointed One, Christ, but it's not a name, by the way. I mean, we say it, Jesus Christ. That's not his name. His name is Jesus, son of Joseph. But Christ is the title. Messiah is his title. Last thing on that is that there's a big difference between knowing about Jesus, really, which is what he was asking them. Do you know about me, or do you know me? There's a huge difference there, isn't there? Lots of people know about Jesus. I've told you this before. The guy next door, great farmer. He's the guy I get hay from, and I love to scare him. I don't really mean to do it, but I've done it so many times now, it's just habit. I walk around the hay field, and he'll say, Jesus Christ. And I say, no, I'm not, but I know who he is, and I'll introduce you to him. I mean, because it's scary, but I mean, people know about Jesus, right? But do they know him? Do they know him? C.S. Lewis once wrote in Mere Christianity, he said this. He says, I'm trying to prevent anyone from saying the really foolish thing that people often say about Jesus, which is what they say is, I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing, C.S. Lewis says, that we must not say. A man who is merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would be a lunatic on the level of a person who says he's a poached egg. Or else he would be the devil of heaven. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come up with the patronizing nonsense, now these are C.S. Lewis words, not mine, about him being a great human teacher. He has not left that option open to us. He did not intend to. I think that's really insightful, knowing about Jesus, but do we really know Jesus? And we have, and you guys hear this stuff more than I do probably, about people who say, well, yeah, I know of Jesus, and I just don't believe it. He was a great moral teacher. Well, C.S. Lewis says you really can't say that. Because if he was a moral teacher and he says that I'm God, you're basically saying he wasn't a moral teacher because he's a big liar, right? So is he or isn't he? Who is he? And we have to make that choice. That's part of what Jesus is really wanting to do here. And so he brings the disciples to this place to force the decision. Am I just a man on the level of Caesar that's got the temple on top of the hill, or like Baal or like Pan, or am I God? Am I who I have said I am throughout the time that you've known me? Napoleon once said this about Jesus. He says, I know men, and Jesus Christ is more than a man. And this was Napoleon who said that. There was another general, Quintus Fabius, and he was discussing in a war, how he would take this particular position, that is, take over a hill or a bridge or whatever it was, I can't remember. And someone suggested a certain course of action, and this advisor said, well, it's only going to cost the lives of a few men. And Fabius looked at him and he said, are you willing to be one of those few? The thing is that Jesus calls us to something very hard, but he's willing to do it himself. Now, we didn't read that part, we're going to in a moment, where he says, take up your cross and follow me. Well, if he hadn't done that, we couldn't do it. But because he has done it and risen and given us the power, guess what? We can do it. we can carry our cross. So in verse 31, it starts this way. And he began to teach them the Son of Man. So this is after they confess, or Peter confesses, right? To teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days he would rise again. And he was stating the matter plainly. So he's teaching, but just saying, listen, this is what's going to happen. Well, Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Now think about that. He took him aside and began to correct him, rebuke him. He said, you can't do that. I mean, you're gonna force everybody away. Nobody's going to follow you. They're not going to believe in you. But turning around and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, get behind me, Satan, for you're not setting your mind on God's interests, but on man's. You know, we do that in our own lives as well, don't we? Where we think about others, and I'm not saying we shouldn't think about others, but we misplace our concern about someone over the will that God has for that particular person. Let me address this first, though. Was it really Satan who was saying it? Well, no, I don't think so. I don't believe that it was Satan, but it was him influencing Peter. Peter had allowed himself to be that conduit. But let's put it in today's terms so you can understand a little bit better. How many times have you done this? Let's say you have a friend or you have a child and you want to protect them. Normal, right? And so you say, no, you shouldn't do this. No, this is going to be bad. Where the reality is you should allow that to happen because that ends up being God's will. Have any of you ever done that? I'm raising both my hands. I got 2 daughters. I've done it. We've done that, haven't we? Where we get in the way of God wanting to do something in that person's life, and we need to let him. You got a 30-year-old in your house and you won't let him out? Let him out. I'm just telling you, let him out. Because if they don't learn on their own, make the mistakes, they'll never learn. You're not going to protect them. I think that's an issue in our society in general, is that we don't allow people to fail. We need to allow that. Who are we? We're not God. We don't know what's best for them. We can pray. We need to still keep praying, loving them, taking care of them as much as we can, but we can't get in God's way. Now, I'm not saying that's easy to discern. I'm not. It's difficult to discern. But I've seen, especially in Ukraine and Russia, we saw it all the time. Drunks but in the long run, it ended up hurting those people rather than actually helping them. So in verse 34, he continues on. And he summoned the crowd and his disciples and said to them, now this is where the rubber really hits the road for us. If anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father and the holy angels. So I think there's really 3 things here that we need to focus on. First of all, deny yourself. Get out of the way. Don't think it's about you. One author said we're to deny that we own ourselves. We have to give ourselves up. In 1 Corinthians 6:19 and 20, it says, but you are not your own. You were bought with a price. What Jesus did on that cross is he purchased us. He redeemed us. That's another word. You know, when we take in our bottles, we're redeeming that for 5 cents. Well, it's that idea. It's not exactly that, but it's that idea. But he purchased us. He purchased us with a price. We need to recognize who he is. He has ultimate rights over us. He bought us with a price, his own life. Therefore, we belong to him. You know what that's called? Lordship. Where he is Lord. As a matter of fact, in many places in the New Testament, specifically Paul, but Peter does this as well. James does it as well. It says, James, a What's it say? Bond servant, or actually the word is bond slave. You know why they put servant in there? Because we're a bunch of snowflakes. I'm serious. The translators assumed it was too difficult for people to accept something like that, so they watered it down so that it sounds more palatable. The true word is bond slaves. It means that we are voluntary slaves to the one that has purchased us, has bought us. So Paul does that, Peter does that, James does that. Throughout the New Testament, you see where they have made that commitment to be bond slaves. Now, they're under obligation to do basically, and they've voluntarily done this, to do what Jesus asks, because Jesus has purchased them. Now, I realize that's a bold statement. It's also a rather aggressive stand, isn't it? And I've heard people say, well, yeah, I'm not going to go that far. As a matter of fact, in some of the newer translations, it says, Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ. Okay, it's great to be a servant, right? But that's not what it means. It's not exact. It's watered down again. It's Paul, a bondslave. Peter, a bondslave. Yes, they're servants, but they're more than servants. Now think about the implications of that and the logic of what Jesus is saying. If anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself or herself. It's not just the guys. They must deny themselves. It's not about us. It's about what he wants in our lives. And that means, according to what he says there, is take up your cross and follow me. So, as I understand that, is be willing to take up the hard thing, to do the hard thing, whatever it is that God asks you to do. May not be comfortable. For some of you, it might be getting up here at some point. See, she's already laughing. I know what that means. Some of you, it may be that. Some of you, it may be, I don't know what it is. I don't know what God is calling you or others to. I know what some of the decisions are that God has called you to, some of you. And those have been difficult. And yet, that's what Jesus is asking. So he says, take up your cross. And so, think about that. What is a cross? A cross, we often wear it for earrings, for jewelry, right? You know what the cross really is? And what do we mean by that when we wear those? Usually it's peace, hope. It's a remembrance, if you will, of what Jesus has done. But it's an execution symbol. If you think of it, actually what it was a symbol of execution. So my cross to bear, and it doesn't mean just daily stuff. It means more than that. It's an expression of that requires that we bear things that maybe humble us, expose us, offend us, shame us, that come because we're following after Jesus. We don't talk to somebody because we're ashamed or something on that order, and we're scared, which is okay. I understand that. And yet, Jesus is saying, get rid of that. Just go tell him. Go love on him. Go share the hope that you've been given. Listen to what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 10, verses 38 and 39. He says, if you refuse to take up my cross, or take up your cross and follow me, you're not worthy of being mine. Now that's hard, isn't it? That's really hard. And then he says in 39, if you cling to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for me, you will find it. What Jesus is saying there is, I am worth all of this. I'm worth all. I've given up everything for you. Do you want me or not? Peter finally did understand all this, and if you go to 1 Peter 2:24, it says, and he, that is Jesus himself, bore our sins in his body on the cross so that we might die to sin and live to righteousness, for by his wounds you were healed. He finally understood what Jesus was saying. Satan no longer was having any input on this particular statement that he was making. So let's try to make this more plain. Nate Saint, who was a missionary down to I believe it's the Auca peoples in South America, he was killed, a whole plane load of guys. that went in there to share the gospel. He said this. He says, people who do not know the Lord ask why we waste our lives as missionaries. They forget that they too are expending their lives, and when the bubble has burst, they will have nothing of eternal significance to show for the years that they have wasted. Ouch, pretty blunt. But that's what Nate was saying. Joan of Arc, when she was dying on the cross, at the stake, said this. Every man gives his life for what he believes. Some people believe in little or nothing, and yet they give their lives to that little or nothing. One life is all we have. We live it, and it's gone. But to live without belief is more terrible than dying. Even more terrible than dying young. And so then I want to ask the question, what are you burning for? What are we willing? So then that leads us to the third idea here that Jesus talks about in this passage. And that is that we live in obedience and we follow. We live in obedience and we follow. You know, when we make the decision to follow Jesus, it's not always easy. Somebody asked me this morning about Ukraine. And I said, it's the hardest thing I've ever done, and it's the most satisfying thing I've ever done. And if I had the opportunity, I'd go back and do it all over again. How about you guys? Hardest thing you've ever done, most satisfying thing I've ever done. Not because it was easy, not because it was perfect, not because we didn't have problems. One of the things that came up is we were threatened with our lives because in Ukraine, the trafficking of women is rampant. It is one of the most corrupt countries in the world, and it was back then. And we had a couple gals in the church that were on the edge of being trafficked, and we found them and saved them. And then we were threatened by the mafia, the KGB, and the police with our lives. How does that make you feel? Was it worth it? Well, sure it was. To do what God has asked us to do, is it worth it? Of course it is. But in our painkiller culture, sorry for saying that so bluntly, isn't that what? If we got an ache, oh, I got a hangnail. Well, let me get you a Benadryl for that, or whatever it is, right? I mean, we do that. Where we seek comfort, we seek to avoid suffering, we seek to avoid trials, where we need to have a balanced understanding of what suffering is. And that's hard to achieve in our culture. I think Jesus sets out the challenge for us. Take up your cross. Follow me. And what he's implying is, no, it won't always be easy, but that's not the point. It's going to make a difference. It's going to be the things that matter. Who do people say you are? Are they going to remember you for that? Or are they going to remember you for the couch potato comfort Christian? Now, that's a judgment call. And forgive me, I'm not trying to judge anybody. But I know our culture. How can we avoid the pain? How can we avoid the struggles, the things that are going on around us? So to follow Jesus is to deny our right to ourselves, take up that cross, accept the circumstances that result from making that decision, and look to him for the power to grow and to endure. And he will do that. Now, I know that that's hard to talk about. And I have to be honest, I wish it was just cushy. That's in heaven, though. Don't worry about that right now. That will be when we get to be with Jesus. Then that'll be the cushy time. That's why I say the fly fishing. Do you think I have time to go fly fishing anymore? Not at all. But I will in heaven. I'm going to have time then. At least I believe I will. I hope I will. But it's a difficult thing. In John chapter 16, I'm not going to read the whole, as a matter of fact, I'm not going to read any of that passage, but if you go look at it later, Jesus was talking about making the hard decisions to follow him. And the scripture there says that well over half of the people left him because his sayings were hard or difficult. That's what I'm afraid of in our world today, that we're going to leave him because it's hard. So what? Let it be hard. It's okay. Life is hard. Embrace it. But you know what? As a follower of Jesus, where we've taken up our cross, we said, Jesus, we submit to whatever it is you called us to. He'll give you the strength to walk through that, whatever it is. I mean, I'm looking at people right now, and in my mind, I'm thinking of the things you've gone through, the difficulties, the struggles, the suffering. And yet I see And I know what Jesus sees is victory. He sees something where you've grown, where we're different, where people see that. And that's what he's asking us. You know, in every culture, there's certain things that say, well, if you gain this or that, if you acquire this or that, or achieve something, you know, a diploma or a new Mercedes or a brand new beach home or $1 million in the bank account, or I don't care what it is, that you'll be happy, 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 satisfied. Everything will be wonderful, right? And what does Jesus say? No, you won't. No, you won't. In the long run, none of that stuff matters. It's all going to burn. I mean, if you go to Revelation and look at the book of Revelation, what are the streets in heaven paved with? Gold. And who cares? What are you doing with it? Stepping on it. Think about that. It's nothing. It means nothing, except for it's something dedicated to the Lord, right? That stuff means nothing. I remember a time in Yalta, we were having Yalta's in Crimea, by the way, if you didn't know. It's the World War II peace accords were signed, and we used to spend a lot of time there. And I was walking down the street one day, and this guy came out of this magazine, Russian, came out of this store, and he had a brand new Mercedes-Benz. I mean, it was brand new, sitting on the side of the road. Some lady walked out, and this guy was probably mid-30s, something like that, maybe early 40s, dressed to the hilt. And the lady started talking. I really wasn't paying a whole lot of attention until this. And she said, so how's life? Oh, great. What's going on? He says, well, I don't have enough money. But you know what? In general, I never have enough money. And you know, that hit me really hard. Because isn't that what we normally say? Okay, we may not state it. Well, I don't have enough for that. But in general, I could use more, right? We want more, and I'm as bad as anybody. I counted last night. You know how many crowbars I have? Like 8 or 10. Anybody need a crowbar? I mean, for heaven's sakes, how many can we use at once, right? We collect. That's who we are. Ask Clyde wherever you're at. I don't even see him now. I don't remember where he's at. But ask him about collecting, right? Collecting stuff. In Luke chapter 12, verses 15, it says this. Jesus said, beware and be on your guard against every form of greed. For not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions. You know, there's really nothing more poignant in history than the story of Alexander the Great. Now, you know who he was, right? You've heard of him in history. A great conqueror. Do you know how old he was? He was in his early 30s when he did all that. And at the age of 33, when he'd finally conquered Iraq, Iran, that area, he went into a drunk, and he was down, despondent, crying, because there's no more worlds to go out and conquer. Now think about that. He had everything in the world that he wanted, and it wasn't enough. Well, let's put it on a more modern level. Vladimir Ilyich Putin. Know that name? Richest man in the world. Elon isn't even close. Has a $1 billion dacha, which is a vacation home, south of Sochi. $1 billion. Can you imagine that? And it's not enough. He wants the old Soviet Union reunited regardless of whatever anybody else wants. Supposedly a Christian, too, by the way. Now, I'm not the one to judge that, and God's going to judge that. But the fruit does not seem to reflect the tree that it is coming from, that is, of Christ, is it not? It's never enough. We want more. One story I'd heard was of a man who went to visit on the missionary field, and he was visiting a medical missionary who was about to perform surgery, and when they got there, the surgeon asked this visitor, would you like to come help? observe and maybe help me if I need it. And he said, sure, I'll do that. So they gowned up and went into this room, which was a third world operating room. And what normally would take a matter of maybe an hour, hour and a half, took 8 hours to do a surgery, very delicate surgery. And when he came out of it and the surgeon was cleaning up and the visitor asked, he says, how much do you think that would have been worth in America? He says, thousands. He says, it just, the intricacy of the surgery, it was probably worth $1,000 or several $1,000s. He says, well, what are you going to get here? He said, well, here I'm going to get the smile of my patient once she is better and the approval of my Heavenly Father, and that's the best right there. So it is for those of us who choose to follow Jesus. What I'm afraid of is what I see and what you see is, well, I'll try it for a while, then, move on to something better, right? Well, I don't think there is anything better. What Jesus is offering us, what he is giving us, what he's challenging us to do. You want spice in life? I love jalapenos, habaneros, all that, but that's nothing compared to what this kind of spice in life. The spice where you have to trust. The spice where you get to be in his hands, pliable, doing what he asks. Are we willing to give it all? Let me close with this story. Well, almost. In Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice, that tells the story of Portia. Portia. I don't know how you pronounce it. Portia is what I'll call her. A beautiful and wealthy heiress. And she had many suitors, but her father, in those days when he arranged marriages, had stipulated that the person who came had to meet specific requirements. So what he did was he made 3 boxes. One was made out of gold, one was made out of silver, and the other was made out of lead. And on the top of the gold box, he had this inscription: whoever chooses me shall gain what many men desire. And you open it up, and there was a skull inside. Inside the silver one, and on top it says, whoever chooses me will get what he deserves. And inside was a picture of a fool. But the winning chest was made of lead, and when on the outside it says, whoever chooses me must give and risk all that he has. And he opens it up, and it's a picture of Portia inside. Now, I think that is what Jesus is asking. He wants us to pick the thing that we have to give our all to do, that we cling to him, that we gather with him, that we do everything that he wants. Who cares if you have a BMW or a Mercedes or a brand new house on the beach? In the end, is that going to matter? When we get to heaven and Jesus asks, who are you? Who do people say that I am? Do you think that's going to matter? Oh, Jesus, I caught a 25-inch trout. Or I killed this big 5-point buck. Or I had this big fishing boat. Or you know what I'm getting at, right? Or I was a big wig in GM. None of that matters in the long run. What does matter is who we are before Jesus. Jesus said in 34 through 36, let me just read it again. If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. Charles the Great, or Charlemagne, you know that name? He was the kind of the one who got the Carolinian era going in the 800s. A long time ago. You probably don't remember that. Even you, Jim, don't remember that one. I'm teasing, brother, you know. So he died on January 28th, 814. And when the archaeologists finally opened up his tomb, and this was in about 1100, so several hundred years had gone by, they found this vault that was unbelievable. His throne was made out of marble. There was gold everywhere. It was just beautiful in there. Except he wasn't in the coffin. He was actually sitting on the throne. Well, his skeleton was. And on his lap was a Bible. And one big pointy stick of a finger was pointing at a verse in Matthew 18:26. For what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his soul? Really, ultimately, What he was asking or what he was pointing out is really what this is about. What will it profit a man if he gains the whole world? You have everything you want, do everything you want, not have to worry about anything, but you lose your own soul. What a tremendous lesson. What's your decision today? Because every day really is a new decision. Who do we want to follow? Are we willing? Lord Jesus, I just thank you that